I heard my name before I even stepped into the conference room. Ava's team got lucky. That's all this is. The words, coated in arrogance, floated out from behind the glass door. I froze, heart pounding. The folder in my hands felt suddenly heavier. She secured the contract, sure, but let's be honest. She's a mid-tier manager with a community college degree. We can't risk the company's future on people like her. That voice, David Reynolds, our newly appointed Chief Growth Officer, fresh off his MBA from Wharton, 0 years of actual client work. I took a slow, steadying breath and pushed open the door. They both turned, David in his $3,000 suit, fake polished smile, and James Carter, our CEO, whose expression flickered when he saw me. "Eva," James said, smoothing his tie like nothing had happened. "Perfect timing." David recovered first. "Great news. We've just been discussing your $80 million deal with Helix Corp. Impressive work." I kept my expression neutral. "Thank you. I'll have the signed documents on your desk by Monday." James gave me a tight nod. "Excellent. Actually, that's why we asked you here." I sat down, tucking my folder neatly in front of me. James leaned forward, folding his hands on the mahogany table. "First, congratulations. You've landed the largest contract in the company's history." "Truly." David jumped in. "And that success has shown us the scale of clients we want to pursue going forward. Fortune 500 companies, global accounts, which means—" He gave a fake apologetic smile. "We need a leadership team that reflects that level of excellence." I stared at him. "What are you saying?" James sighed, eyes flicking briefly to the degree framed on the wall behind me. My degree from Lakeview Community College. The one I'd earned while working 2 jobs and raising my son alone. "Ava," James said gently, "we've decided to dissolve the Strategic Development Department, effective immediately." The words hit harder than I expected. "You're dissolving my department?" "You've done excellent groundwork," David continued smoothly. "But to attract high-profile clients, we need leaders with top-tier credentials. Ivy League, global consulting experience." I kept my face blank, but inside something cracked and hardened. 6 years. 6 years of growing this company's client base from nothing. 6 years of traveling, sacrificing holidays, hitting targets they thought were impossible. Now I was being discarded like a temporary intern. I glanced at James. "So this is your thank you for securing an $80 million deal?" He shifted in his chair. "It's not personal, Eva. It's strategy. We're restructuring for growth." I gave them both a polite smile. "Of course." "Well, thank you for the opportunity." David looked surprised. He'd expected a fight, maybe tears. I gave him nothing. I shook James's hand, steady and firm. "I wish you both all the best." And I meant it, because I already knew something they didn't. Helix Corp's CEO, Marcia Reynolds, the woman who had personally signed off on the $80 million deal, wasn't just a client. She was a close friend. What David and James didn't know was that I hadn't secured Helix by pitching strategy decks or dropping Harvard names. I'd secured them by solving a $20 million logistics problem that no other firm had touched. By showing up at their warehouses, by sitting with their operations teams on weekends, by proving that I cared about their business as much as they did. And Marcia? She didn't care about Ivy League degrees. She cared about results. As I left the conference room, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcia. "Looking forward to seeing you Monday. Drinks after?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely." David's voice echoed in my mind. "We want high-caliber graduates." I walked past the reception, past the interns who barely glanced up. Let them have their restructuring. Because on Monday, in that client meeting, they'd learn exactly what happens when you value pedigree over performance. And I couldn't wait. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I sat in the corner of Brew & Company, a quiet cafe 2 blocks from my former office. My laptop open, a fresh coffee steaming beside me. I wasn't in the boardroom. I wasn't even on company time. But I knew exactly what was happening downtown. At that very moment, James Carter and David Reynolds were welcoming Marcia Reynolds, CEO of Helix Corp., into the executive conference room for what was supposed to be the formal signing of the largest contract in the company's history. I'd rehearsed this scenario all weekend, not with bitterness, but with a strange, clinical curiosity. Would they stumble over my absence? Would they lie? Or would they assume, as men like David always did, that I was replaceable? At 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. Marcia. You're late, her text read, followed by a winking emoji. I smiled. Not attending. We'll catch up later. 3 dots appeared. Then her response came. Excuse me? I set my phone down, heart beating faster, but not from fear. This wasn't just business. This was a lesson in reality. At 9:23 a.m., a call came through. Philip, one of my former team members. I answered quietly. Morning, Phil. He didn't even say hello. Ava, what the hell did you do? I stirred my coffee. Calm. What happened? I'm standing outside the boardroom. It's chaos. His voice dropped. Marcia walked in, asked for you. James started explaining you'd moved on and the department was being restructured. David tried to jump in with some speech about leadership transitions. I said nothing, waiting. Marcia cut them off. Philip continued. She said, and I quote, if Eva's not leading this account, we're walking. I couldn't help the small, satisfied smile. And she got up, just stood up, shook hands, and told them to call her when they were serious about doing business. I let out a low breath. That sounds about right. Eva, they look like they've been hit by a truck. David's face is... Philip gave a short laugh. I wish you could see it. I don't need to, I replied, standing and gathering my things. They've made their choices. I ended the call, feeling lighter than I had in months, because the truth was simple. James and David had played a dangerous game, betting that clients would fall for a flashy resume over proven trust. And they'd lost. By 10 a.m., the second call came in. This time, James. I let it ring twice before answering. James. Ava. His voice was tight, too friendly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I smiled as I walked toward my car. Is that so? Yes. Look, there's no easy way to say this. We acted hastily last week. We value your contributions. We want you back to oversee the Helix account. I unlocked my car door, leaning against it. I see. We'd be happy to discuss a revised compensation package, a leadership role, title upgrade. I let the silence hang, letting him squirm. Eva, please. His voice cracked slightly. That please nearly broke me. Not because I pitied him, but because it confirmed everything I'd suspected. They hadn't respected me. They'd used me, until I became inconvenient. And now that the deal was at risk, I was suddenly valuable again. I exhaled slowly. James, I appreciate the call. I truly do, but I'm not coming back. A stunned pause. Eva, this is $80 million on the line. No, James. It's my integrity on the line. He started to speak, but I ended the call before he could finish. I slid into the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive. I was done. I'd spent 6 years pouring everything into a company that saw me as a placeholder. A stepping stone for someone more polished, more connected, more Ivy League. And the second I became inconvenient, they erased me. That wasn't a company I'd fight to save. The real power, the only power worth having, was knowing your worth and refusing to compromise it. As I drove away, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Marcia. Lunch? I typed back. Absolutely, my treat. And with that, I left James, David, and their restructuring behind. For good. Tuesday morning, 8:45 a.m. I sat across from Marcia Reynolds in a sunlit corner booth at Greenleaf Bistro, the kind of place downtown executives favored for off-the-record conversations. She stirred her tea, studying me with those sharp eyes that rarely missed a detail. "So, you're officially out?" she asked, her tone casual but her meaning direct. I nodded, sipping my coffee. "As of Friday, restructured out of a job by Monday morning." Marcia shook her head, a low chuckle escaping her. I knew James could be arrogant, but I didn't realize he was suicidal. I smiled, but there was a weight in my chest I couldn't shake. "I'm not bitter." "You should be." I met her gaze. "I'm not. I'm done giving energy to people who don't value it." She sat back, folding her arms. "That's exactly why I want to make you an offer." I raised an eyebrow. "An offer?" She leaned in slightly. "I'm not just the CEO of Helix. I also sit on the advisory board for Klein & Foster, one of the fastest-growing logistics tech firms in the country. We're expanding aggressively. They've been searching for a business development director for months." I blinked. "I know of them. Solid reputation. Tech-forward. And client-focused," Marcia added. "Exactly your style." I hesitated, setting my cup down. "You want me to interview?" "I want you to have a conversation," she corrected, "with their CEO, Aaron Klein. I already told him about you. He's interested. Very interested." I wasn't sure what surprised me more, that Marcia had set this up without asking, or that I didn't feel even a flicker of hesitation. "You're serious?" I asked. Marcia smiled. "I'm dead serious. And if you end up there, let's just say Helix is always looking for reliable partners." My heart thudded quietly. "You'd move the deal?" She shrugged, sipping her tea. "We signed nothing. And frankly, I'm not about to invest $80 million with a company that treats people like you the way they did. Integrity matters to me." I met her eyes. It matters to me too. For the first time in days, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not a rebound offer. Not a lifeline. An opportunity. Real. Earned. By noon, I was sitting across from Aaron Klein in his minimalist office. Sleek, modern, no mahogany conference tables in sight. Aaron was mid-40s, dressed in a crisp button-down, no tie, sleeves rolled. He greeted me with a firm handshake and none of the corporate small talk I'd grown used to. "Marcia thinks highly of you," he said, getting straight to the point. "And Marcia doesn't give out praise lightly." I smiled. "She's a tough one." "Exactly why I called this meeting." He leaned back in his chair. "I've read up on your work with Helix and other clients. You build relationships, not just contracts. That's the only way they last," I replied. Aaron nodded slowly. "That's rare, and it's exactly what we need." I waited, letting him take the lead. "We've grown by 60% in the last 2 years, but we're ready for the next leap, and that requires someone who understands both business development and client loyalty. Someone who doesn't just chase numbers." I folded my hands. "And you think that's me?" He smiled. "I know that's you." There it was. Director, no hedging, and no questions about where I went to school. "What would the role look like?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Director of Business Development, reporting directly to me. Full autonomy to build your strategy and your team. We'll support you, and stay out of your way." I felt my pulse quicken. "Compensation?" He handed me a folder. Inside, a detailed offer letter. Base salary. Higher than anything I'd made before. Bonus structure. Aggressive but fair. Equity. Meaningful. I read through it twice, my heart thudding louder with every line. "I won't insult you by asking for an immediate answer," Aaron said, "but I hope you'll consider it." I closed the folder gently. "I don't need time." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "I'm in." Aaron smiled and extended his hand. "Welcome aboard, Eva." As we shook hands, I felt it. something I hadn't felt at Orion in years. Respect. I walked out of that office not with a job offer, but with a new beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead. My first official day at Klein and Foster was nothing like my old first days at Orion. No formal HR tour, no laminated employee handbook, no whispered comments about where I went to school. Just a simple welcome from Erin, a firm handshake, and a clear message: do what you do best. And I did. I spent the first week meeting every department head. Not in scheduled meetings, but at their desks, in their spaces. I listened more than I talked. Asked questions no one else seemed to ask. About process bottlenecks, client frustrations, internal gaps. By the second week, I had my strategy drafted. Not a flashy 100-slide presentation. Just a focused plan built on one belief I'd held since the day I started in business. Clients don't buy products. They buy people. I pitched Erin the idea of a client-first division. Small, agile teams designed around long-term partnerships, not short-term wins. He barely glanced at the numbers before nodding. Build it. So I did, and the first person I called was Philip. He answered on the first ring. Ava? I smiled. Ever considered a change? The silence on the other end lasted only 2 seconds. When do I start? Philip joined the following Monday. By the end of the month, 2 more former colleagues followed. People I'd trusted at Orion, who, like me, had grown tired of being overlooked in favor of pedigrees and politics. We weren't poaching. We were building something better. By month 3, my team had secured 3 major contracts, including a $25 million deal that had been in Orion's pipeline for over a year but never closed. Marcia made good on her word, too. Helix officially partnered with Klein and Foster, transferring their $80 million deal to us. That was the moment everything changed. Word travels fast in this industry. Within weeks, clients I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out. Old contacts from conferences, industry partners I'd built quiet relationships with. And one by one, they asked me the same question. Why Klein and Foster? I gave them the honest answer. Because here, results mattered more than resumes. Because here, client trust wasn't a buzzword. Because here, talent wasn't defined by where you got your degree. I didn't badmouth Orion. I didn't have to. The facts spoke louder than anything I could have said. By month 6, Klein and Foster's market share had grown by nearly 40%. We weren't just landing new clients. We were quietly taking Orion's. I never intended it as revenge. But in the business world, success often speaks louder than revenge ever could. One afternoon, as I wrapped up a client call, Philip walked into my office, a glass-walled space that overlooked downtown. Simple, but mine. He set a printed report on my desk. You might want to see this. I glanced down. The headline made me pause. Orion Tech reports second consecutive quarter of declining revenue. I skimmed the article. Helix gone. 2 key clients signed with competitors. Stock down 25%. Internal restructuring rumored. I leaned back in my chair, tapping the page lightly. This was never about taking them down, I said quietly. Philip gave a small nod. Number. But it turns out treating good people like they're disposable has consequences. I met his eyes. It always does. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. An unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. Ava, it's James. His voice was flat, strained. I leaned back in my chair. Didn't expect this call. A long pause. I wanted to check in, see how things are going. I almost laughed. They're going well, James. Very well. He cleared his throat. I won't take up your time. Just, if you ever want to have a conversation, I'd be open to it. I let the silence stretch before replying, thank you, but I think we're on very different paths now. I ended the call gently but firmly, because sometimes the most powerful answer isn't anger, it's moving on. That night, I walked into my apartment, dropped my keys on the counter, and sat down with a glass of wine. I wasn't the same woman who'd been fired 6 months earlier. I wasn't chasing respect. I had built it. on my terms. And I finally understood something I wished I'd learned years ago. When people show you what they value, believe them, then choose to value yourself more. 3 months later, I stood in front of a glass wall at the Global Logistics Summit in Chicago, watching the city skyline blur beneath a soft spring rain. The conference was packed. Industry leaders, rising startups, investors. Klein and Foster wasn't just attending this year. We were headlining, and I was giving the keynote. When Aaron first suggested it, I almost laughed. Me? Speaking in front of 1,000 executives? But then I realized, why not me? I wasn't there because of a fancy diploma or a corporate pedigree. I was there because our client portfolio had tripled in under a year. Because we'd closed deals others said were impossible. Because our retention rate was nearly perfect. That morning, I stepped on stage, heart-pounding, but steady. I spoke about client trust, about long-term partnerships, about how results outlast resumes. And when I walked off, the applause was real. So were the conversations that followed. By noon, I had handshakes and dinner invitations from companies I'd once only dreamed of working with, including some former Orion clients. And then, I saw him, James Carter. He stood by the registration desk, scanning the crowd like a man looking for an escape route. I almost walked past. But then his eyes met mine. He approached, slower than I remembered him ever walking. Ava. James. I kept my voice even, professional. He gave a small, tight smile. You were impressive this morning. Thank you. A pause. He shifted awkwardly. I wanted to reach out sooner. I nodded, but didn't. He exhaled, looking down at his hands. Orion's not in a good place. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We lost 3 major accounts this quarter. David's gone. The board asked for his resignation after the Helix fallout. I met his eyes. And you? A flicker of something. Regret? Exhaustion. Crossed his face. I'm still standing. Barely. The board's considering options. I tilted my head. Options like restructuring? Options like selling. His voice dropped lower. We're looking for a merger partner or a buyer. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not for the company, for the people inside it. The ones who worked hard. The ones who stayed loyal. The ones who, like me, had been dismissed when they became inconvenient. I see, I said quietly. James straightened. I came to ask if you'd consider coming back. I blinked. You're serious? He nodded. We need leadership, credibility. Clients trust you. I stared at him for a long moment. 6 months ago, I would have dreamed of hearing those words. Now, they felt hollow. You didn't value me when it mattered, I said evenly. Why now? He swallowed hard. Because I was wrong. For the first time since we met, his voice held no arrogance. I was wrong about you, about what really drives this business. And I'm asking, as a last chance for Orion, help us. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't trying to punish him. I just knew my answer wasn't simple. James, I said finally, it's not personal, but I'm exactly where I want to be. His shoulders slumped, just a fraction. I hope you figure it out, I added, for your team's sake. He gave a slow nod. So do I. As he turned to leave, I stopped him. For what it's worth. I hope this humbles you, and I hope it makes you a better leader than you were to me. He looked back, something almost like gratitude flickering in his eyes. I think it already has, he said softly. And then he was gone. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where he'd been. That wasn't how I imagined this would end. But maybe that was the point. It wasn't about watching him fail. It was about knowing I didn't need his approval. I'd built something better, and this time I wasn't leaving it behind. 3 months later, I stood in the glass-walled conference room of Klein and Foster's headquarters, overlooking the skyline of Dallas. My team, Philip, Marcia, and Aaron, sat around the table reviewing the final numbers for the quarter. Our growth had exceeded every projection. We didn't just meet targets, we broke them. Helix's deal was thriving. Our client retention rate hit an all-time high. And Orion? They'd been acquired in a quiet, desperate merger by a private equity firm. I hadn't heard from James again, but I didn't need to. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. This meeting wasn't about him. It was about us. Aaron leaned forward. Ava, when you joined, I knew you'd bring results. But this... He shook his head, almost smiling. You've transformed how we do business. Philip grinned. And how we treat people. I glanced around the table at the people I'd come to respect, and who respected me back. It wasn't about titles anymore. It was about impact. When the meeting ended, Aaron caught me before I left. Walk with me? He asked. We strolled through the quiet hallway, past open workspaces buzzing with quiet focus. Aaron stopped near the balcony, folding his arms. I wanted to say thank you. I raised an eyebrow. For what? For betting on us? For betting on yourself? I smiled. You gave me the freedom to do what I do best. He nodded, then turned slightly. The board met this morning. We're restructuring, expanding, and we want you to take on a bigger role. I met his eyes. Bigger how? Chief Commercial Officer, reporting directly to me. Full authority over business development, client relations, and strategic partnerships. I stared at him, stunned. Aaron. He lifted a hand. No pressure. You've earned this. Every bit of it. And we want you to grow with us. For a long moment, I said nothing. Not because I doubted myself, but because I realized I wasn't chasing anyone's validation anymore. I'd built this. On my terms. With my values. I nodded slowly. I'm in. Aaron smiled. I knew you'd say that. We shook hands, and this time it felt right. Because this wasn't a company using me to close a deal. This was a place that saw me, as I was, and valued it. That evening, as the office quieted and the city lights blinked on, I sat in my office reflecting on the last year. Everything I'd lost. Everything I'd gained. I thought about James and Orion, and how easy it would have been to stay bitter. But bitterness doesn't build futures. I'd learned that the hard way. Instead, I chose growth. I chose to bet on the person I'd always been. The one they underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. And I won. Philip poked his head in. We're heading out for drinks. You coming? I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. As I grabbed my bag, my eyes caught the framed photo on my desk. A simple snapshot from our team's first client dinner. Laughter, casual clothes, no suits. A reminder of what really mattered. Not power, not titles, not empty approval from the people who never saw you, but respect. Earned, given, shared. I left the office with my team, stepping into the warm evening air, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Free. The world hadn't changed, corporate games still existed, egos still ruled boardrooms. But I had changed. I'd learned that when people show you who they are, believe them. And when you show yourself what you're capable of, never forget it, because the only approval you'll ever truly need is your own. I still remember the exact moment like a freeze frame in my mind. I was standing at the end of the long mahogany conference table, carefully placing a fresh set of acquisition documents into leather binders. The room smelled of polished wood, expensive cologne, and power. The CEO, Nathan Carlisle, the man who ran our multinational firm like his personal empire, leaned back in his chair, flashing that signature smug grin. Mandy, he said, like my name was a punchline. You're a secretary, not a lawyer. Maybe stick to stapling things, huh? A few of the executives chuckled. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I said nothing. I simply nodded and set the binder down in front of him. I had been at Carlyle Holdings for 8 years. I started as an admin assistant, but over time I became something else entirely. The unofficial fixer. The quiet one in the room who remembered every clause, every date, every clause buried on page 47 of a 500-page contract. But none of that mattered to Nathan. In his eyes, I was furniture. Useful, silent, and invisible. The meeting was about the company's biggest acquisition yet, buying out a European logistics firm valued at $90 million. Everyone around the table was practically vibrating with excitement. The deal was set to close in a week, and Nathan, of course, would take all the credit. But as I handed him the contract draft for final review, I couldn't ignore the knot tightening in my chest. There's something in here you might want legal to double-check, I said quietly, tapping a section near the back. Nathan barely glanced at it. I said, "Leave it." I looked him in the eye. It's a loophole. Page 312, subsection D. It technically allows third-party purchase rights under dormant license clauses. Nathan scoffed loud enough for the whole room to hear. Mandy, please, I have 3 Ivy League lawyers working on this. If they're not worried, I'm not worried. And I don't pay you to think. The room fell silent. Some smirked. Some looked away. I nodded again. Understood, sir. But inside, something shifted. For years, I had accepted the condescending comments, the subtle digs, the glass ceiling pressed firmly against my head. I told myself it was the price of staying in the game. But this moment, this was different. This wasn't just arrogance, it was negligence, and I wasn't going to let it slide. That night, I stayed late at the office under the pretense of preparing meeting notes. The cleaning crew passed by without a second glance. After all, Mandy the secretary was always there, always invisible. But I wasn't preparing notes. I was reading, carefully, every clause, every footnote, every cross-reference of that acquisition contract. And what I found chilled me. The dormant license clause was real and legal. It allowed a third party to assume licensing rights if they paid a nominal fee and submitted a claim before the acquisition officially closed. The price? $1. It was a clause designed for emergencies, never meant to be triggered. But it hadn't been removed, and no one else had noticed. I stared at the legal print long after midnight. My hands trembled, but not with fear. With something sharper, stronger. For the first time, I realized the real power wasn't with the people at the boardroom table. It was with the people who understood the fine print. I made a decision that night. A decision that would change everything. But I wasn't reckless, and I wasn't naive. I knew I'd need a plan. And more importantly, timing. Because the clock on the acquisition was ticking. And Nathan Carlyle had no idea that by the time they tried to close their $90 million deal, I'd already be the legal owner of exactly what they were trying to buy. The next morning, the office hummed with its usual rhythm. Coffee brewing, keyboards clacking, small talk flowing like white noise. I sat at my desk outside the executive suite, reviewing emails. On the surface, I looked exactly like what they thought I was. The quiet secretary who didn't make waves. But under my blazer, folded neatly in my bag, sat a signed check for $1 and a printed claim form. I had called in a favor from an old college friend who worked in corporate compliance. She confirmed what I had read. The dormant license clause was binding. Absurd, yes, but binding. It had been left in the original acquisition papers from 20 years ago and carried over with every ownership change. And according to international trade law, if someone submitted a formal claim and payment before a merger's finalization, that person could assume the licensing rights of the company's core logistics software. Without that license, the acquisition would collapse. I wasn't a lawyer, but I didn't need to be. I just needed to follow the rules exactly as they were written. At 12:47 p.m., during lunch break, I walked to a nearby notary office. I signed the form, paid the filing fee, and submitted the claim. Legally, transparently, and with every document in order. I paid the $1 in cash. The notary, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, glanced at the figure and smirked. "Hope this works out for you," she said. I smiled back. "Me too." By the time I returned to the office, nothing seemed different. Nathan's assistant was gossiping with marketing. The CFO was on a call, laughing about golf. Nathan himself was barking at someone about synergy on the other side of the glass wall. I sat down and typed a brief summary of my filing, sending it to my personal email for safekeeping. The clock ticked. Nothing happened. For 2 days. I started to wonder if I had imagined it all, if maybe I had misunderstood some legal technicality. I had risked my job, my career, maybe even a lawsuit. But on the morning of the third day, I noticed a shift. At 9:15 a.m., a lawyer from the acquisition firm stormed into Nathan's office. They spoke in low, clipped tones. Nathan's voice rose once, a sharp bark, before dropping again. By noon, the legal team was huddled in the executive boardroom. At 1:30 p.m., Nathan summoned the entire leadership team for an urgent update. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. I heard enough as people whispered in hallways, snippets of conversations that floated my way. Some loophole claim? Who the hell filed it? The license is frozen. The deal can't close without it. I kept my head down, pretending not to listen. That afternoon, Nathan walked past my desk without looking at me. The man who had smirked at me 3 days earlier didn't smirk anymore. I went home that night with my heart pounding. Not out of fear. Out of something else. A strange mixture of disbelief and calm. It was working. But this wasn't over. Because I knew men like Nathan Carlisle didn't fold quietly. They fought. They bluffed. They crushed anything in their way. And I had just become a very inconvenient obstacle. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I even made it into the office. Nathan Carlisle, read the caller ID. I stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering over the answer button. Then I picked up. "Mandy," he said, voice sharp but coated with a thin layer of corporate politeness. "I need you in my office. Now." I smiled slightly, though he couldn't see it. "Of course, sir," I replied, my voice steady. As I walked through the office toward that glass door, I felt every gaze follow me. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. Because Nathan was about to realize. This was one corporate secretary who didn't just know the rules. I knew how to play them. And this game had only just begun. Nathan's office was colder than usual. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of the look on his face when I walked in. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the skyline like a general surveying a battlefield. I closed the door behind me. "Mandy," he said, finally turning. His voice was calm, almost casual. "Have a seat." I sat. He didn't. "I've been told," he began slowly, "that a dormant license claim has been filed against the Hanover acquisition." I said nothing. His jaw tightened. Imagine my surprise when I learned it was filed. By my secretary. I met his gaze, keeping my expression neutral. I followed the process outlined in the original contract. "It's a legal claim." He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Legal or not, you had no right. You had no authority. You blindsided this company and jeopardized a $90 million acquisition." I kept my hands folded on my lap. "Actually, I exercised a public clause that your legal team overlooked. And as of now, I hold the licensing rights Hanover requires to operate in this market." His eyes darkened. "What are you playing at?" I blinked slowly. "Nothing, sir. I'm simply ensuring my rights as per the agreement terms." For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched. Then, with a low chuckle, he circled behind his desk and sat down, folding his hands like a poker player about to raise the stakes. "You want money?" I tilted my head slightly. "Excuse me?" He gave a sharp smile. "Come on, let's not pretend. You saw an opportunity to grab a piece of this deal. Fine. Name your price. I'll buy you out of this little stunt. Clean. Quiet. I held his gaze. I didn't file the claim for money. His smile faltered. Then what? I leaned forward slightly. I filed it because you dismissed me like I didn't exist. You made a choice to ignore my warning. The same way you've ignored every person who wasn't sitting at this table with a title you respect. I'm not here to negotiate, Nathan. I'm here because this isn't your game to win by default anymore. For the first time, his confidence wavered. You realize, he said slowly, that this will not end well for you. I nodded. I realize it won't end well for you either. We stared at each other in a silent standoff, the air between us razor sharp. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. You'll regret this, Mandy. I gave him a small, polite smile. I'll take my chances. I stood and walked to the door. His voice stopped me just as I reached for the handle. You think you're smarter than me? I turned, met his gaze head on. No, Nathan. I think I read the fine print. And then I left. The hours after our confrontation felt surreal. I returned to my desk, heart pounding, acting as if nothing had happened. The office was a sea of hushed voices and darting glances. Word travels fast in corporate halls, especially when a secretary walks into the CEO's office and comes out alive. By late afternoon, the company's legal team was scrambling. I overheard 2 junior associates whispering in the break room. They can't close the deal without the license. Who even filed it? I heard, Mandy. I kept walking, but I wasn't naive. I knew Nathan wouldn't let this go quietly. The first blow landed before I even left the building. At 5:03 p.m., an email popped up in my inbox. From HR. Subject, formal inquiry into conduct. Immediate response required. I opened it, my pulse steady. They were investigating me for unauthorized interference with corporate contractual agreements. I almost laughed. Almost. Because I had seen this tactic before. A classic move in corporate chess. Smear the opponent, discredit them, make them look like a rogue actor before they could build a defense. But I was ready. I forwarded the email to my attorney. Yes, I had hired one. 2 days ago. I wasn't walking into this unarmed. Nathan thought this was still his game. He hadn't realized yet. I'd already flipped the board. The HR inquiry wasn't a surprise. But what came next was. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, wanting to stay ahead of whatever Nathan had planned. The first thing I noticed was my computer. Locked. A red screen blinked back at me. Access restricted. Please contact IT. I took a slow breath. At 8:13 a.m., I got called into HR again. 2 people waited for me. One, the head of HR, and the other, a corporate counsel I had never seen before. We've temporarily suspended your system access, the HR director began, folding her hands neatly on the table. Pending investigation into recent concerns raised by the executive office. I nodded calmly. Concerns relating to a lawful, documented license claim that I filed personally, outside of company resources? A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. We're simply following protocol. I leaned back in my chair. So am I. I handed her a letter, signed by my attorney, formally stating that any retaliatory action taken against me, including restricting access or assigning blame without evidence, would be met with legal response. The counsel's lips pressed into a thin line as he read it. Is that a threat, Ms. Harris? I met his gaze evenly. Number, it's a fact. We sat in silence. Finally, HR nodded stiffly. We'll review this with our department. I left the office with no access to my system, but with something better. A paper trail. By noon, the whispers had grown louder. I caught fragments in the hallways. HR's on her now. She's finished. Crazy move. I walked past them all, keeping my expression neutral. I knew how this game worked. Nathan was trying to push me out before the board or shareholders got wind of what really happened. If I walked away now, It would confirm every accusation: unauthorized conduct, insubordination, breach of trust. But I wasn't walking away. At 2 p.m., I met with my attorney in a small cafe 2 blocks from the office. He was sharp, methodical, not one for theatrics. Exactly the kind of lawyer you want when facing a corporate machine. He slid a folder across the table. "We're filing a preemptive injunction. They move against you, they'll have to explain everything in court. Public record." I opened the folder, glancing over the documents. "Nathan won't risk that," I said quietly. My attorney smiled slightly. "That's the point." The next day, the atmosphere at the office shifted. The tension didn't dissolve. It thickened. But this time, it wasn't directed at me. It was Nathan. Word had started leaking. People asked questions. How did a secretary file a binding claim? Why hadn't legal caught it? Why was HR scrambling like this? The CFO avoided eye contact with me. 2 VPs whispered in the hallway when I passed. And then, late that afternoon, something I didn't expect happened. I got a call from the chairman of the board. "Mandy, this is Richard Clark. I believe we need to have a conversation." I sat across from him in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor. Unlike Nathan, Richard didn't posture. He listened. For 20 minutes, I laid it all out. The ignored warning, the loophole, Nathan's dismissal, the filing, the retaliation. I presented everything with documents. Calm, factual, professional. When I finished, Richard sat back, hands steepled. "You've put us in a difficult position," he said finally. I met his eyes. "No, sir. Nathan did that. I followed the law. The company's leadership ignored it." He exhaled slowly, nodding. "You're not wrong." A pause stretched between us. "You've given us a lot to consider," he said. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't speak to the press in the meantime." I gave a small, polite smile. "I'm not looking for headlines, Mr. Clark. I'm looking for accountability." He nodded again. This time, slower. Understood. As I stood to leave, he said quietly, "We'll be in touch." By the time I left the building that night, the office felt like a cracked facade, still standing but ready to collapse. Nathan thought this was a game of intimidation. But he forgot one thing. You can't intimidate someone who has nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. By Monday morning, the office no longer felt like the same place. It wasn't anything obvious. No sudden announcements, no dramatic firings. But you could sense it in the air, in the clipped conversations, the nervous glances. The corporate ecosystem had shifted. Nathan wasn't holding court like usual. His glass office door, normally wide open, was closed, blinds drawn, and Richard Clark, the chairman, was on site. All morning, meetings shuffled, calendar invites changed. Executives were called upstairs for private discussions. HR kept their heads down. The legal department moved in and out of the boardroom like silent messengers. I watched it all from my desk, careful, quiet. By noon, rumors swirled. Emergency board review. Compliance breach. Carlisle's future in question. I didn't feed them. I didn't need to. Because this time I wasn't part of the Whisper network. I was at the center of it. At 2:15 p.m., I got the call. "Boardroom, now." The voice belonged to Richard's assistant. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked the long corridor toward the executive suite. The glass walls reflected my image as I passed, calm, composed, exactly as I wanted to be seen. When I entered, every board member was seated. Nathan sat at the far end. His face was tight, jaw clenched, arms crossed over his chest. Richard gestured for me to sit across from him, one chair apart from Nathan. I nodded and took my seat. The room fell silent. Then Richard spoke. "We've reviewed the documents Ms. Harris provided, along with statements from legal, HR, and compliance. We've also consulted with outside counsel." He looked around the table. A few heads nodded. "This acquisition has been jeopardized by a critical oversight. That much is undeniable. The question before us now is how we handle both the business implications and the internal leadership issues that led us here. A murmur rippled through the board members. Richard turned to me. Ms. Harris, you filed a legal claim as a private individual using your own resources. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Were company resources used? No, sir. Did you act on proprietary information not available in public records? I shook my head. The clause I acted on was part of the original acquisition agreement, a public document, accessible through corporate filings. Richard nodded once. Thank you. He turned to Nathan. And you, Mr. Carlyle, were made aware of this potential issue prior to the claim being filed? Nathan's jaw tightened. Yes or no? Nathan's nostrils flared. Yes. Did you investigate the concern? Nathan hesitated, then muttered, I dismissed it. Silence fell again. Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Noted. The next hour was a controlled dismantling. They reviewed Nathan's mishandling of the deal, his refusal to escalate concerns, his attempt to retaliate through HR, and the formal complaint I had submitted through legal counsel. Every step Nathan had taken to discredit me was now evidence against him. He tried to defend himself. Excuses, half-truths, shifting blame to his legal team, even suggesting I acted out of spite. But the board wasn't buying it, and I didn't need to say much. The facts spoke louder than any defense I could have given. Finally, Richard delivered the verdict. Effective immediately, Nathan Carlyle is placed on administrative leave pending further review. The board will appoint interim leadership until a final decision is made regarding his position. Nathan opened his mouth, but Richard's raised hand silenced him. You may collect your personal belongings under supervision. Your access is revoked as of now. Nathan's face turned a deep shade of crimson. He shot me a look, not of anger, but disbelief. I met his eyes with steady calm. For once, he had no words. When the board adjourned, Richard pulled me aside. You handled yourself with professionalism and restraint, he said quietly. I respect that. Thank you, sir. He gave a small nod. We'll need your help navigating the fallout. Hanover's lawyers are already asking questions. I'll be ready. And I meant it, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about doing what Nathan never understood. Protecting the company by doing the right thing. The official announcement came 2 days later. Nathan Carlyle stepped down from his position as CEO, citing personal reasons. No press release, no farewell statement. Just a quiet internal memo that landed in everyone's inbox before 9 a.m., but no one believed it. The office buzzed with whispered versions of the same story. The board pushed him out. The acquisition nearly collapsed, and somehow, the secretary had been at the center of it all. I stayed silent. I wasn't interested in office gossip. What mattered was the deal. With Nathan gone, the Hanover acquisition moved forward, but this time, with full transparency. The board appointed Richard Clark as interim CEO. He insisted on a revised negotiation team, and to my surprise, he asked me to be part of it. Not as a token assistant, not as a silent note-taker, as a recognized advisor. You've proven you understand what's at stake, Richard said during our first strategy session, and you know better than most how to read between the lines. I accepted, with conditions. I wasn't going to be a figurehead. I wanted clear authority on compliance checks and contractual oversight. I wanted the autonomy to speak up without having to push through layers of bureaucracy. To my surprise, Richard agreed without hesitation. Consider it done, he said. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked side by side with the legal team, reviewing every inch of the acquisition paperwork. Hanover's attorneys were cautious but cooperative, especially after learning what had almost derailed the deal. When we finally closed the acquisition, it was airtight. No loopholes, no oversights, no ego-driven mistakes. The deal made headlines in industry circles, not because of its size, but because of the quiet shift in how it was handled. For once, a corporate giant closed a deal with integrity, and without burying its mistakes under layers of spin. One evening, after the final documents were signed, I found myself alone in the conference room, staring at the skyline. 8 years. 8 years of being underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. I had started this job thinking hard work alone would earn respect. I learned the hard way that it doesn't. Sometimes you have to take respect. Claim it. Stand firm when others expect you to fold. And most of all, you have to know your worth before anyone else will. Richard joined me a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered me one. "You know," he said, settling into a chair across from me, "the board's been talking." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." He smiled faintly. "We want you to stay on, not just for compliance work. We're creating a new role, Director of Risk and Contract Strategy. Reports directly to the executive board." I blinked. "That's a real position?" He chuckled. "It is now." I exhaled slowly. "Why me?" His smile faded into something sincere. "Because you didn't just protect this company from a financial disaster. You protected it from itself. And you did it without seeking credit, revenge, or personal gain." I studied him for a moment. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. "You earned it." The next morning, I moved into my new office. A modest space, no corner windows, no grand title on the door. And I was fine with that. Because this wasn't about a nameplate. It was about having a voice. And making sure no one else in this company ever had to fight alone just to be heard. As for Nathan, the last I heard, he took a consulting gig on the West Coast. A smaller firm. Fewer headlines. Maybe he'd learned something. Or maybe he hadn't. That wasn't my concern anymore. Some battles you fight for survival, some for principle. And some you fight because walking away means accepting the way things are. When you know they should be better. I didn't set out to win a war. I just refused to lose quietly. And in the end, that made all the difference.